Thank you. Thank you for joining us back at the Guiding Tides podcast. I'm Jeff Chasen, one of the co-hosts. Happy to announce today we're going to be talking about coping mechanisms, and we've talked plenty about different problems and reflected personally. And at times we did talk about solutions, but today we're going to have a really focused talk on solutions to help us get that kicked off. Mahesh, take it away.
Thanks, Jeff. So to expand on what Jeff was just talking about, we've been talking about what direction are we taking this in? What are the key elements that we want to get across to you guys, and how do we engage you guys in conversation? So please throw your comments at the bottom of the screen and let us know what resonates with you and what you're looking for. Maybe some questions you have for us to expand on in future episodes. That'd be great. And don't forget to hit subscribe and like.
Please.
I've been dying to say that.
You did good. If I weren't on this podcast and I were watching, I'd be smashing that like button right now. Because you said it. Thank you. So what are we going over today, Mahesh?
So when we look at episode 2, we defined anxiety. We talked about anxiety and panic disorders. And the key takeaway was that your anxiety is different than my anxiety. Your life experiences are different than my life experiences because we're individuals, right? And across the board to everybody that's watching us. So when we acknowledge that, we also have to look at, well, what works for you in moving forward and what works for me. So we want to get to coping strategies. What are the different coping strategies that work for us? What are coping strategies that we use now that are negative coping strategies? When do we come to the point where we realize that they are negative coping strategies? And do we have the strength to face that and to say, I got to change things up? For example, I come home at the end of the day. I had a crappy day at work. I deserve that drink. I need that drink to get the edge off. I want that drink. I need some me time. Honey, not right now. Give me some time. I'm going to recalibrate. I'll be with you in half an hour. But I want to knock back a couple of scotches and I'll be fine. Now I'll be approachable. Now I've self-medicated, and that's what I need. That's my coping strategy. Too harmful, 1 drink, 2 drinks, what's the big deal? And that elevates to the point where we realize that's not working for us.
That's just masking it.
Exactly.
Sound like me with Fortnite right now. Honey, just let me get a couple rounds in.
We do it in so many different ways. My wife has called me on it when she'll be talking to me about something, and I'll be scrolling through my phone. She's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I was just checking this, I was just checking that. I'm like, I'm not in the moment watching her. And maybe that's not a coping strategy that people would identify with.
Doom scrolling.
I'm sorry?
It's called doom scrolling.
Yeah. Why am I doing that?
Yeah.
You know,
Doom scrolling is the
same
new
thing.
stress eating. Stress eating while doom scrolling, elite.
Does that make you feel better when you doom scroll?
I allow myself 10 minutes every single day to doom scroll at the end of the night.
So I think, and I'm curious your take, Mahesh, that sounds like an actual coping mechanism.
Right.
That's my perception of it. And I want to hear from you how you define a coping mechanism versus a crutch versus a vice. Because I feel as though without, boundaries and parameters, you can quickly, cross a line of a healthy coping mechanism into a vice, a crutch, an addiction.
that coping mechanism can quickly turn into your new problem. Right? And the identification of your coping strategy comes in stages. So let's start from the beginning. We have a given scenario where we're just freaking out because we're having a panic attack on a regular basis. We don't know where to go. We don't know how to address it. We don't even know what it is. So the first stages of dealing with mental health is having the guidance, hopefully, because if you're flying solo, you're driving in the dark. You're driving with blindfolds on. That's not helpful.
Mhm.
So if you can get to the stage of whomever it is, does it have to be a therapist? Maybe not in the beginning. Maybe it's someone you trust. Who's in your support network? Do you have a family member? Do you have a colleague? Do you have a best friend? Do you have anybody? Can you go to your parish? Can you go to someone that you look to for guidance or for help? Even if you can't do that, there's a suicide hotline. They're trained professionals. So you might start with someone you're comfortable with and build up from there. And I think that's the journey in identifying the coping strategies that work for you.
Should those evolve? Coping strategies? I mean, would you say a coping strategy is for momentary gain or lasting results?
For me, identifying if they're sustainable or not first really is where I would begin to answer that question. Uh, I'm really good at fooling other people. I'm terrible at fooling myself. So anytime there's some sort of maladaptive or negative or toxic coping mechanism in place in my life, I'm well aware of it. I know it. And I know my time is limited, with that. And as I guess grew up, and it's funny when you said, let's start at the beginning, it's like, I just instantly visually pictured myself sitting in elementary school for, or junior high, talk about where some of this began for me. But yeah, I'm really interested to see the direction we go in from here.
Yeah, expanding on that, on what you're saying, that's funny how you took it as like, let's start from the beginning.
Yeah.
And I didn't mean it like, how old were you when you first started experiencing the issues that you're dealing with? I'm talking about, um, let's give it a scenario. You're a young kid, junior high school, right?
Hmm.
And you're getting bullied, you're getting picked on, you're feeling alienated, you don't feel like you belong anywhere, and it's causing you serious anxiety on a daily basis. What do you do with that? And it's harder with kids because they don't even know they're going through it. They just accept a lot of their pain as life. This is my life. At some point, as a child, as a teenager, as an adult, at some point, you start realizing this isn't right. This isn't normal. So getting back to the focus of this episode is the coping strategy. So when we decide, that episode could be completely different. When do we, how do we get to that point? So that's separate. But once we identify, I got to do something about this. You were asking, is that an evolutionary process of identifying coping strategies? Of course it is. Because there is no pamphlet of like do A, B, and C, like something you bought from IKEA and like you just assembling it and there it is, right? You got to start looking at what's really going to resonate with me, honestly. Now, some people will say, hey, just join a gym, go work out, you're going to feel better. You got these endorphins kicking in, you're going to be fine. Well, I can get the membership, but if I'm not going to the gym to do that, what use is that coping strategy?
I kept my gym's lights on with my membership because I never went.
I feel like everybody watching this can agree with that. Everybody probably has that little key tag on their key ring, and
Right.
it's probably worn to hell and you haven't gone. It looks like you did, but you didn't. Interesting though, when you were saying that, Mahesh, and thank you for answering my question. The one thing I feel as though, and correct me if I'm wrong, but again, this is my opinion here.
Yeah.
The one thing that really shouldn't change in your coping mechanisms is having faith in them. That, from where I sit, is the catalyst to make things successful.
I agree with you.
Having faith, or as you had explained to me before, hope, different nomenclature around that.
Right.
But it's the same idea. So if I say, hey, I'm having a panic attack, I'm going to do a grounding exercise, and that's my coping. But in the back of my head, I'm like, all right, it's not going to fucking work. It's not going to work.
Does part of you hope in that moment where you're trying it? Do you hope it works?
I hope it works.
Sure.
Of
And that's
course.
having faith.
That's having faith. So to have faith in that, I believe, brings you to a better outcome. So yes, the strategy is going to change. Now I understand that from what you had just explained, but you need to keep hope.
Well, that's the jump start in anything for progression, is the hope that it's going to work. You call it hope, you call it faith, I call it hope, but another way to look at it is buy-in. So when someone suggests a coping strategy to you, that if you're at a loss as to how to identify anything that you could attach yourself to, I got to buy into it.
Mm.
I have to believe, I have to have hope, I have to have faith. Any way you twist it around, it's what is my ability to latch onto saying, I'm going to give this a shot. I'm going to try.
In my line of work, that's a dangerous gamble to tell someone sitting on the other side of the table whose life is just in ruins that, this is going to work for you. Just have faith. Just,
Sure.
just have faith.
Being told to have faith is completely different than you coming up with the faith. Excellent point. Absolutely. So lecturing too, and I use that word specifically because when we are on the receiving end of getting that heartfelt advice from someone who loves you or a therapist who's looking out for your best interests, when we give advice, that doesn't stick the same way when you have your buy-in.
People
can-
can say whatever they want,
Right.
but if you're not ready to hear it, it
Ah.
doesn't really matter.
Well, there you go.
Can't
know?
say the wrong thing to somebody who's not listening. And you can't say, I feel I already screwed it up. If somebody knows exactly what I'm trying to say, drop it in the comment section.
No, I mean, I don't think that's the wrong thing to say. I mean, if it's perceived as, I think you're telling me a bunch of garbage, that's not going to work with me.
Yeah.
That takes a lot of guts and strength to say that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're telling me, if I'm an alcoholic, maybe you should start thinking about, I don't know, not drinking. I can see that as judgmental.
Yep.
I can see that as infuriating.
Mm-hmm.
Especially
depending on where you are at that moment in time.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I want to jump to all my self-defense mechanisms. Like, who are you?
Yeah.
What do you think you are?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
And then your ego kicks in.
Oh, my God. So that is the root of everything.
Yep.
So along with that, that's a great point. So along with our ego and faith and buy-in, how do we get over our ego? It's admitting that you have a problem that you're dealing with,
You have
first
to
of
start
all.
there.
You have to start there. So that's ground level.
Yep.
Right? So after the spiraling stops and you're left with the devastation of your actions, owning your behavior, accepting responsibility for where your life is. Yes, we are the victim of our circumstances to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
To a degree.
And then to add to that, even like, how about be accountable towards that by making responsible decisions around what your solution is going to be to move forward. The term evidence-based practices, evidence-based
Sure.
solutions, they're called that because there's evidence, a mountain of evidence that states that it works.
There's all that science stuff behind it.
Right.
Big words.
And
Right.
clinical trials and
Yes.
people like, a history of decades and maybe even longer with some practices of, if you put these 3, 4, 5 ingredients into it, mix it all together, put it in a pan and stick it in the oven, it's going to rise and it's going to look, you add another one and frost it and you get a cake and it looks like the cake that's on the picture of the box.
So would
It's,
you
you
say,
know?
Mahesh, that a coping strategy is the vehicle in which you get to your destination?
A coping strategy, in my opinion, is something to address your underlying battle. A coping strategy is something to counteract the negativity you're facing in your life. So it doesn't matter if it's an anxiety disorder. It doesn't matter if it's an eating disorder. You could be a cutter. You could be an alcoholic. Okay, you got stuff going on. Okay. When you get to the point of when you start saying, I need to take accountability for how this is affecting my life and the ripple effect, how it's affecting my family, how it's affecting the other things that are important to me in my life. When you get to that and you say, I got to do something about it, what is the it that you're going to do? The it that you're going to do is a coping strategy to move from point A of where you're struggling to point B of a realistic goal that you can hit and then reassess.
You need to do things differently.
You got to change things around.
You need to have goals. You just hit the nail. You said the word goal. I almost jumped. That's always been the only catalyst for me changing, has been something dangled in front of me, a carrot, if you will, that I'm willing to put physical, to say cope or coping mechanism, it implies suffering.
So
if I'm suffering, I'm not going to adopt some new practice to end my suffering that isn't worth, where I'm coming out of, right? You following me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I'm talking about goals, right, that's the skeletal format, that's the parameters, that's the framework that we have to work with it.
The destination.
It guides the destination. It gives it direction. So the destination is right. So when we define the goal, I want to stop doing this. I want to get better at that. I want to express myself in a way where I don't have to feel angry when I'm expressing myself. X, Y, and Z. Fine. The goal is X, Y, and Z. So having that goal is crucial. What is B when you're moving from A to B? So that's the goal, right? So identifying the short-term goal, it's got to be short-term because you want to feel like you accomplished something. You can't say when you're 25 years old that when you're 60, you hope you get your stuff together.
Right.
Who could do that?
Goals are the rung to the ladder.
Yes.
The dream is what you're looking to elevate to. But without goals, without those steps or rungs.
And you got to be able to
You're not
touch
gonna-
that ladder. You got to feel confident climbing up that ladder.
Yep.
You got to have the placement on the rungs, not fearing that, oh my God, I don't want to look down. I might fall off, because that's who can do that? You're living in a state of anxiety to address your anxiety. That makes no sense.
Right.
Right? So you have your goal. So the ladder is the coping strategy, right? So as I elevate up that ladder closer to my goal, what's helping me? What's my strategy to help me cope with the issue at hand to get me out of that darkness and further towards my goal?
A crazy one that surprised me with anxiety was the specific mindfulness exercise where I become self-aware that I'm, in an attack or just hurting, and I will instruct myself to find every single object in the room that's blue and just make note of it and just look around, and I'm breathing while I'm doing that, and I'm
Grounding.
grounding exercise. Yeah. And then yellow, then red, just to talk about some nuts and bolts coping mechanisms. That's a positive go-to for me. Meditation has been an odd one because more or less it was forced upon me in treatment, when I was in my residential rehab, and I really just kind of took to it as a kind of a social adaptive thing. Everyone else was doing it. I didn't want to be the odd duck. I didn't want to, go against the grain. I was there to get better. And almost immediately the results I got from meditating, from sitting, and just, there's a million different definitions, find your own, just sitting and breathing and just trying to calm and also identify the thoughts, label the thoughts, but try and let them pass by, and then just try to become self-aware of what I'm thinking about all the time. And in an effort to still that, combined to that, getting to enjoy some of my first moments of peace in, a very long time, without realizing it, it really helped me along in early recovery. And then I could spend an hour talking about coping mechanisms, but
So let me ask
other
you
people
something.
sitting at the table.
So when you were in your program and you used the words forced into it, but you
I had an
didn't-
option. Sure. Yeah.
right. So I'm curious as to what was your thought process to cause the buy-in? Now you mentioned that you don't want to be the odd man out, not participating. Was that solely it, or was there something else going on?
There were a number of factors. I mean, it was kind of part of the niche of the rehab I went to, and it was a private pay rehab. So the only reason I was there was because my father was kind and loving enough to cough up that expense. So I didn't want, I felt like a loser enough, in my 30s at this rehab. I maybe I was 28, 29. I didn't want to go against the grain, and, I wanted to try and get the most out of this. I've never meditated before. I rolled my eyes, I made fun of people that meditate, like that's, weird, whatever. And I found myself meditating and getting results from it, finding peace in it. And if I didn't get some sort of result from it, I wouldn't still be talking about it and practicing it this was going back 10 years now.
No, absolutely.
so-
I find it hard for me to meditate.
Why
It's
is that?
it's very hard for me to shut my brain off.
Have you dove in on that anymore? I mean,
I mean, I don't know. I feel like I can't concentrate on what the person's saying, although I could really go for one of the groups in our wellness center that we had.
Mhm.
That was the only time that I could actually focus and meditate, maybe because the room was silent or maybe it was the setting. But ever since being out of the 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 facility that we were in, I haven't been able to really fully meditate.
You talk a lot about journaling. I journal too. I'm curious kind of what your style is, like what your narration style even like, and what do you get out of it specifically? I'm interested to hear a lot of, because that's another great coping mechanism.
Yeah,
is
for
just
sure.
getting a note, getting something in front of you with a pen and just getting it out of your head and look, for me, looking at it and seeing it become real in front of me, it looks a little more ridiculous than it did when it was just a thought in my head.
Yes,
And it's easy for
100%.
me to dismiss and move past stuff. But
Yeah.
what do you have to say,
I
Jess?
mean, so journaling is my coping skill, I guess I could say. Um, and it started, I'm not a big reader. I'm not a big writer at all. I mean, I guess I like to write, but I have to really be passionate about something that I'm writing about if I am writing something. Um, so in the rehab that we were in, I would have this little notebook and I would just write about what was going on in the room at the time. Like, this kid's leg is twitching, or, because at that moment I was very angry and I was in a very weird place. Um, so that's how I started, like just observations around the room and then observations on how I'm feeling. And then I would kind of get down, what I needed to do that day. That's kind of how I started. So to get some thoughts out on paper made me feel better. And then that transformed into writing about my mornings or writing about how I slept last night or, things I'm grateful for. That's something else that I bring into my journaling. I try to, journal about three things that I am grateful for um, every single day. Even if the day in itself went to shit, I still have to try to find some gratitude to keep me grounded. So to me, that's what works.
Yeah. So these different topics that you pick, observations, things you're grateful for, how your day went.
Mm-hmm.
Did you come up with those on your own, or were you taught that these are some drills that you might want to utilize when you're journaling?
So I kind of came up with that on my own. It was kind of like the first thing that came to my mind. And then I put a little bit more thought into it. And then I was like, let this be my album. I kind of document all my journals as my album because I'm kind of narrating my life at this point. And that's how I came up with it.
Because what you're doing is you're using templates to organize how to use your coping mechanism,
No.
which is a go-to. So when we look at exercise,
Mm-hmm.
people have a routine when they exercise.
Yeah.
I'm going to do bench pressing first. I'm going to do my triceps. I'm going to do my biceps. Do my abs last. At the end it off, I'm going to do some cardio. That's their template.
Yep.
That's their structure to make that coping mechanism work for them,
Yeah.
right? That's their menu, their choices off the menu that they're going to pick, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it speaks to them.
Yep.
And when you have that template set, if you do it on your own, that's beautiful because there's automatic buy-in.
Yep.
You picked it, you created it. That'll make you do it again. Chances are a greater possibility and potential for you to do it again as opposed to just one and done.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I'm always writing. I feel like I always have to have a pen and paper nearby. But like I did get away from it for a while. I was telling you, Christian, like some days I just can't journal because there's just nothing to write about. I have nothing in my head, which is weird because I used to have a million thoughts constantly going through my mind. But it's been a journey for sure from where I started to where I am today with journaling. But I still love it.
Do you find yourself at this point that it's easy for you to throw your thoughts down on paper as opposed to when you first started?
Actually, no.
Ah,
I was in a really, really bad place when I started journaling.
That's a really interesting observation. I'm thinking about like writing my fourth step. out of the 12 steps of recovery. And it was easier for me to write inventory back then than it is for me to do that, engage in that practice today. It's like, I don't know.
I feel like I still had all my luggage when I started. So like it was so easy for me because if I was feeling every single emotion, I was feeling angry, I was feeling sad, I was feeling mad, I was feeling pity, I was feeling
Right in your event horizon, you were right there.
exactly. So I had so much emotion. So letting out and releasing that emotion during that time was therapeutic because it was almost like I was letting go of these things little by little. Like I've stated in past episodes that I would write letters to my past self. That was one of the coping skills, coping strategies that I used to kind of get past that hurdle, get past that hurdle of why am I so fixated on 17? Why am I so fixated on 25? You know, like there is traumatic things that have happened throughout numerous ages in my life. So I needed to kind of chisel that out one by one.
And that was obviously an activity that group facilitator brought to the table one day.
Yep.
Which for people watching this, a lot of you might be experiencing the thought of like, well, what if you're such a jacked up mental reject that like left to your own devices and left to your own thinking, these coping mechanisms we come up with are just going to continue to party us deeper and deeper and deeper. So there's something to be said about the willingness or the good decision making or like the very commendable decision you made willingly to engage yourself into an environment where these new ideas and new things would be brought in front of you for you to
examine. Well, once I hit my rock bottom, like where everything had went to shit, I said before too that like I treated that program like school because that was my last option. I had no other option out. Everything that I had tried, any coping mechanisms that I had, did not get me out of the hell that I was living in. So getting into that program was the best decision that I could have done for myself because I did learn all the tools and things that I needed to learn that I'd never had before. I had no clue about a lot of the things that we had learned, and which in turn I learned a lot about myself. So yeah, I wouldn't have had that coping mechanisms or any sort of coping mechanisms if it wasn't for program.
How the hell did Christian Favreau shake hands with his fans? What kind of coping mechanisms were you bringing to the table that weren't working for you anymore?
Well, I'd love to talk about me, but you're not off the hook yet.
Okay.
Why this? Why this on coping mechanisms?
Oh, because at that moment in time, this is what I thought of coping mechanisms, like quotation marks. That would never help me because all the ones that I've tried in the past had never worked before. Like it worked for like a week and I failed. Like I got my gym membership and I went to the gym for like a week and I failed.
I want to take that deeper though. Why did the ones that other people told you could do work?
Because I took accountability for my bullshit.
Let me make an observation.
Go ahead.
I wonder that you had faith in them, not faith in yourself, but faith in your decisions.
100%. Because I had to have faith. And if I didn't, I had zero faith in myself because like I said before, I never held myself accountable up until I admitted that I needed help. And I admitted that I wasn't okay and I was struggling and I was in hell. So I didn't really believe in myself at the time because I had nothing left. So believing in these facilitators because that's their job, I clung hope to it.
I'm happy you found hope in that pretty much answered the question of what you just asked me. I had tried so many things, beat my head against the fucking wall, took matters in my own hands. I refused to put in other people's. I declined the idea so many times, repelled going to counseling. This is not going to work. Forget a facility. That was so far off the radar for me. I would say things like, when people recommend that I'm not going to a puzzle factory, just arrogant shit, right? Because I didn't know.
If I get it. Yeah.
Right. Which I'm not knocking that, but that was my skewed vision of getting a sort of mental health treatment. And I guess I'd want to address it. So once I entered into this facility, like you said, I have faith in them. They're professionals. They know what they're doing. I'm going to trust her. There was a woman there, and I think you were referencing her earlier.
Yes.
She had us meditating. Fuck, meditate? What is it? Meditate. But then I bought into it one day, and I felt a release. She had us grounding. You know, we're sitting, we did a body scan. So it was, how was your head, your shoulders, your elbows, your head, right down. How do you feel? She took us through some, I guess, examples or
Vision, meditation.
she gave us instructions. And
But her voice was amazing.
it was so soothing.
Like she had the best meditation voice ever.
Yes.
So
But then I started, point being at the end of it, I felt the difference. And I'm like, oh, so this is a coping mechanism. I felt one way, I did something, applied action, and then I felt better. I'm like, I get down with this. Some days it works, some days it doesn't. I may have mentioned it here, it might have been a group, honestly, but something I want to bring to the table. I had learned, similar to you, Jeff, where it's all the blue objects, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method.
Was that
So-
breathing?
So I do it in tandem to breathing, but I look for 5 things I could see, and I focus on each one. I see Jet's black shirt, I see Mahesh's white cup, so on and so forth. And then I'm going to mix it up a little bit here. I would go off of what I hear, the sounds. I was able to use that on a construction site. I'm at the top of a hoistway, sitting on a beam. Well,
No, thank you.
having a panic attack up there, holy shit. And I got all my guys around me. I can't feel any. Hey, can we get a rescue mission up there? I'm freezing right now. Freeze. So I'm like, I gotta figure this out. I have to apply something here, or else I could get hurt, quite frankly, to boil it down. And I did that. I'm looking around the garden. I see, green wall. I see high vis here. Did that. Boiled it down from now. What do I feel? What do I smell? That helped me tremendously.
This is probably going to be the most impactful thing I say in this whole episode. Go to openai.com, download, create a free account, type the words. What are some accessible, easy coping mechanisms for, and then whatever your thing is, depression, anxiety, anger, feeling, like trapped in your environment, stuck, feeling hopeless.
Whatever you do, you, and all of you, whatever you do, you have to buy into what you're doing. Believe that it's going to work. Because you can do that. And I've done similar things, and I'm like, oh, I should all these suggestions, great. I might see Mahesh, out at the bar, he's having a hard time, and I'm like, hey man, let's run through. Let me stop myself. I was at my bachelor party, and a good friend of mine, what happens at bachelor party stays there. But something had transpired, and I was really, really worked out. And one of my buddies grabbed me, and we're all 3 sheets to the wind. And he goes, all right, we're going to do a breathing thing. It was either from his wife's Le Mans class or yoga or something. And he's a guy, all right, breathe in for 8, hold for 2, exhale for 1. Like he was fucking the numbers all up. Now I started hyperventilating. I'm like, Jesus Christ, what?
This isn't the recipe.
Back then I'm yelling at him. I'm like, this isn't working. You're not helping. There was no faith. There was no hope in that situation. But then I learned about it. I learned about breathing, learned about box breathing. Box breathing has been huge for me. That's, from my understanding, the way I learned it is in for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. And I do that when I'm walking through a big like chain store or something, the panic sets in. I start doing it. Nobody knows I'm doing, but I'm doing it and it's working.
Ready.
So
You got that.
I used to look to other people to say, hey, what do I do to fix this? What do I do to feel better? Can't do that. You gotta look within. And I've been big on that lately of looking within to project outward. So I started looking at myself, hey, what works for you? And some shit is probably stupid. And I may tell Mahesh again, so sitting at a bar, seeing you have a hard time. I'm like, hey, let's do a breathing exercise. You're probably gonna say, let's step outside. Ooh, fucking breathing right now. It's not gonna help. My wife's leaving me. The bells are overdue. Breathing ain't gonna fix that.
Your breath stinks.
But with that, we were talking earlier about, having people try things and stuff. You can't tell people what to do. I think it was you making that, right?
Yeah.
You can, the old saying, the deeper horse the water.
You can't make them drink it.
You can't. And when we were in that one of our groups, there was a woman in there. She was just graduating, and I remember I looked to her. I'm like, I can't wait to be there. I've got to be there. And I mean, what we got there. She was giving advice, and she said, "I'll offer this." I keep that very much so in my vocabulary when I talk to people having a hard time. Because if you say, "Hey, you got to do this," definitely it puts a wall up. Don't just
That's the thing comes in real quick.
right. My wife does that with me sometimes, and she scaled back on giving advice, so I shot myself in the foot. But she'll say, "Do this, do this, do this," and I'm like, "Yeah, no shit." Hey, oh, I wish I thought of that. Ego kicks it. But if you gently offer somebody something that's works for you, in hopes that it will work for them too.
It is our long presentation on how somebody presents something to you.
I like to point out to people in my line of work too, like clients, like, how can you question or call this weird or say that this idea that I'm presenting to you isn't a viable solution or an answer when you were convinced that a fifth of vodka, half a rock, have a pleasure in the arm, that those coping mechanisms would work, and I think back to some of my own crazy ones. And yeah, with that point thrown in my face, okay, I'll try the meditation. I'll try the breath work. I'll try the journaling, and thank God for the people that were put in my path that, who opened their mouths and said, "Okay, why don't you try and do this? Why don't you, and that's the reputation I very quickly saw Mahesh has. So it's, I didn't go to the same school that you work at, but had I would have 100% collided with you and hopefully gotten something good to take forward with me like everyone else seems to have.
Had you gone to the same school that he was working at, I would have been kicked out of school sooner. Well, you'd be chasing us around.
Yeah, we got a decade.
Yeah, but you got held back and off. We could solve that out.
But so, hey, five high schools in 4 years. No holding me back.
We're on tape. Well, look, it's a big part to the overall success of mental health, with battling depression, anxiety, PTSD. I mean, I think if you use a coping mechanism for anything, right?
Yeah. Well, that's what it is that when you realize that you have to deal with the problem, again, regardless of the problem, and you have the buy-in to want to change, that's the biggest thing. So presentation ties in directly with perception. So if you're presenting to me what my options are, and I'm in a point to listen to you, I have to be at that point. I have to pass by denial. I have to get over my ego.
You have to be prepared to tell yourself that you're the problem.
Right. Accepting responsibility for the situation I'm in is huge.
Yeah.
And like I said earlier, we are all victims of circumstance to a point. And whether it be socioeconomic, whether it be because, my dad left when I was 3, or whether my mom's an alcoholic. Okay, yeah, life is hard. Yes, it is. I got you. And you got to work through that. But deciding that you want to work through that part right there.
Is what good defines your journey, like a journey.
That's your defining moment for sure.
It is.
When you just said that got me fired up. Look, if I hit that point when I was 17, 18, and I'd shared the story with you, I don't need to hear. But there was a person in my life that kind of built me up, and he was like, "Listen, here's the path you're on. I'm showing you clear to say, here's where you're going."
Yep.
And he was like, you could keep doing what you're doing. You're good at it, but this is it. Look beyond it. And I did. When I recognized that, what I came from, what my mom was, my dad, whatever, social, economical, like I wouldn't be who I am today.
Yeah.
There comes a point where you need to say, am I comfortable doing this? That's fine. So people want to just be just like their parents, and fine.
Yep.
Not knocking that. But if you're in a bad situation, okay, run the pity potty train for a little bit, but then you're going to sack the fuck up.
Right.
That's what I do. You have to. With every situation, every stage of your life. The poor me shit only goes so far.
You sit in the poor me shit for so long, it really does a number on your mental health.
Oh, it does. And I did for a little bit. Like I kind of last year then into that, and I'm like, all right. So similar to Mahesh said in the past. Okay, now what?
Now what?
Now what? Okay, mom died when I was young. There were drug issues in my home, and it's fucking chaos. We moved so many times. Pour me. Okay,
Now what?
now what? Now I'm gonna change it. Now I'm gonna buy and renovate a home for my children so they never have to have that shit. I know how it felt. I'm not gonna bestow it upon them.
Right.
Fuck that. And in turn, I'm gonna change that for me. I'm gonna rewrite my history through that.
So using your pain to be the motivator to move forward.
Pain to passion. Passion for results.
That's a coping strategy right there. That's your coping strategy, right?
Yep.
You've made that Christian's coping strategy.
Arrogance. Arrogance has been a coping strategy of mine for a long time.
Fine.
It's work.
If it works, use it.
And again,
Because it'll change. Because you'll hit a point where you'll burn through that arrogance. You'll burn through that anger. Like, Justice thought that there was so much to journal in the beginning. Yes. There's so much to dump out on that paper. There's so much you want to, just purge. Then you get to the point where it's like, oh, what am I journaling today? Let me jump on what Christian, I want to expand on what you were just saying. So when we hit a point where we've exhausted the worth of that coping strategy, it's time to reevaluate. It's time to reflect on our journey thus far in that coping strategy. So if you reflect on your notes, Jess, if you go back a year and start reading where you were,
I did do that.
right?
I did do that. And
Now, put your seatbelt on, right? Exactly.
I actually like felt horrible. Yeah, I was like, wow.
that poor girl.
Yeah,
like, wow. And I just kind of stood still for a minute and I just thought back, like, thank you, God, that I am not where I was a year ago.
So you can reflect on where you were a year ago and you look at your journey and you look at all the trials and tribulations you've gone through to get to where you are now, right? And it's like, oh my God, in the moment, I wasn't aware of what I was going through to where I am now.
No, you're just living, breathing it.
A dangerous thing that comes up is shame. So when we reflect on our journey thus far and we look at the person we were, we might see all the shameful things that we did when we were that person a year ago. And it comes up for a lot of people. And now it's the whole new issue of I have to rectify certain things that I did a year ago, which is one of the steps from the AA, right? You have to get to the point where you can apologize for things you've done in the past, and settle the score. I mean, I'm summarizing with my own words, but it's the 9th step. If I know I'm going to engage in a negative activity and I'm not doing anything to prevent that, that's on me. And I think we're all guilty of that at certain different points of our lives. But I don't think that's shame. It's shameful that I'm doing it. I should feel shame that I'm not doing anything to prevent that. That's a different aspect of it, But my feeling of, I know this is going to happen. I know I'm in this dilemma and I don't know how to get myself out of it. That's just me sitting with it and being okay with it because I'm not addressing it. And that's where your ego gets involved, and that's where self-pity gets involved, all these different excuses. When it gets to the point where I reach out and say, someone help me stop this. And then you start identifying the coping strategies. So in recapping today's episode, we focused on coping strategies. And we talked about what do we do when we finally get to the point when we start addressing our conflicts, our demons, and what do we rely on as a technique or a game plan or an action plan of how we move forward in dealing with these issues. So we covered meditation, we covered breathing, we covered journaling, and we also talked about negative coping strategies and how that can affect us. Listen, this is a process that everyone goes through, and there is no perfect cookie cutter approach as to how do we go about addressing our problems. By reaching out to our support network, by finding that person that we can confide in is the first step. By acknowledging what our struggles are, that's the foundation where we all start. After we get to that point, after we start acknowledging that I need to do something about my life, and after we start accepting responsibility for what we've done or what we're in, we can start looking at what are the elements to help us move forward. So in the moment, a coping strategy, as defined by the American Psychological Association, is a series of actions or thought process used in meeting a stressful or unpleasant situation or in modifying one's reactions to such a situation. Coping strategies typically involve a conscious and direct approach to problems in contrast to defense mechanisms. So another way of boiling that down to everyday language is that we have to look at strategies that we can implement on a daily basis when we're not in crisis. So we're comfortable in getting into the rhythm of using these techniques, and we make it our own. We have to buy in to what we're doing. We have to make it legitimate. We have to believe that we are moving forward with the hope or faith that we are helping ourselves from moving from point A to point B. And we started talking about goals. So we're moving from coping strategies to action plans based on the goals that we're setting for ourselves. And I have to emphasize this again and again. This is a process. This is not going to happen overnight. You have to have the faith and the hope in yourself that you can move forward. So I appreciate you guys watching. Please drop your comments in the comment section. Please subscribe and hit the like button. We look forward to seeing you guys in the future. And let us know how we're doing. Thank you.